Hello, everyone, and thank you so much for joining us for this podcast, Adventures of the Awakened Heart. The purpose of this podcast is to inspire and empower the conscious community around the world with powerful stories of the awakened heart. My name is Julie Tara, and I'll be your host. And I have the great pleasure today of speaking with my great friend, Charlie Pacello. Hi, Charlie.
Hi, Julie.
How you doing?
I'm good. I'm good. I'm so excited to be able to get started and to talk about the awakened heart with you. Thank you.
Me
Thank
too.
you for
I'm
inviting me.
thrilled. Yeah. Well, let me tell our listeners just a little about you. Charlie Pacello is a mental, emotional, and spiritual healer. He's a PTSD expert and the creator of the program Healing the War Within the Soul. That's actually a very powerful title, Charlie. Healing the War Within the Soul. He is a dynamic speaker, teacher, life coach, actor, author, yoga teacher, and humanitarian. Charlie hosts the popular TV radio show called The Council, which broadcasts from Denver, Colorado on www.kuhsdenver.com to listeners around the world.
Yeah, it's
Charlie,
incredible. It's really incredible to be able to have those opportunities, to be able to share people's wisdoms and understandings and perspectives to a global audience. And it's just been a privilege to be able to do it. So
yeah, and you are so great at it. And I know you're a consummate interviewer and that you've interviewed me last year,
I
and that was
did.
so much fun. And just to let people know, Charlie and I met actually at Gaia, at the Gaia Sphere. Charlie came to a Carolyn Mace event, and I was doing interviews, and so got to interview him. And everybody at Gaia loves Charlie. We just love him.
Well, I love everybody there. I mean, it was so exciting to be able to meet people who are thinking and feeling and being in the same kind of consciousness and awareness, movement to help elevate people's understandings, to help awaken people to their true selves and their essences. And I just love Carolyn Mace, and I've been listening and studying with her for many years, and she was tapping in. She helped to open up one of the last keys for me in really tapping into understanding self-esteem. And boy, oh boy, I had this incredible opportunity to go to Gaia, which was just up the road over here, and that's where I met you and everybody there. And it's just been so great
It's
to
been
find people who are on the same path.
absolutely. I think it's terribly important right now that we find communities that we really resonate with, that they're our family, our spiritual family. And we
Mhm.
certainly feel that, I know at Gaia, I know I do. So, actually my first question for you is, as part of the Gaia community, which is a global community, and it's growing all the time.
Mhm.
How long would you say you've been on the path of spiritual awakening?
Well, that's a loaded question there, Julie. I think I probably have been on the path, excuse me, for about at least 10 years. And the way I was initiated onto my path, I was fairly asleep, I would have to say. I was kind of going through life in motions. That I had been in the military for a number of years. I came from a military family. My dad was in Vietnam. He fought a couple tours in Vietnam. Before him, my grandfather, he was in World War II, and he was on the battlefield with Patton in North Africa. And so there was that transgenerational trauma that had gotten passed down through our family system, which I didn't know about because I was born into this family. And I grew up with a tortured, amazing, noble soul in my father, being able to and try to work with them, my mom and my dad, trying to figure out how to be able to love each other, but both of them were wounded. And so I got into the military because I wanted to understand my dad better, and I wanted to serve as well. And then I worked on the nuclear warfare program, and I was in charge. I was an officer in charge. I graduated from the Air Force Academy, and then I moved into working on these, it's called the GNT, which stands for GPS, which is Global Positioning Systems. And there was these mobile command units that would only be used to conduct end-to-end nuclear war. And I remember thinking to myself, what are we doing? This is insane. And that was like the piercing in my soul that I vividly remember, Julie. And it was like, this is wrong. This violates everything that my consciousness, my soul stands for. And I remember thinking to myself, this is not what I signed up for. What I signed up for was to preserve and protect and honor life, not to destroy it, not to annihilate it.
Yeah.
And so I ended up going down a very dark path. And that was probably the initiating wound. And there has to be an initiating wound, I think, for a lot of spiritual awakenings. You have to have that wounding. And maybe life gives that to you. Maybe your family gives that to you. Maybe a former partner gives that to you, or many partners, or whatever it is. There's something that wounds you, that helps you to recognize the imbalance, the anathema. That's something against the right way. And so it's anathema. It's against the right way of life. And that initiates you on a path to rediscover, to go deeper. And so I ended up following a dark path. I walked a lot of alcohol and drug abuse, and serious chronic depression and suicidal contemplation. I formed relationships with women that replicated exactly what I had witnessed between my mother and my father when I was 2.5 years old, because I didn't know how to love a person, a partner. I just didn't know, and I fell into those patterns of dysfunctional betrayal bond dynamics, where you're falling into these codependent narcissistic dynamics. You're sacrificing yourself in order to make somebody else happy, but you're not happy yourself, and the abuse that happens in those dynamics. And so I was falling into these patterns. I was totally unconscious about it. And I was medicating myself, trying to feel better. And somewhere on my mind, I must have known to go to follow the humanities. I got out of the service and I went into acting. And in my acting, that's when I learned to be in the theater and to reconnect to my creative soul, my heart, my mind. I was like, oh my gosh, I've been living in this world where it was just science and logic and engineering and mathematics, which was all great. But if it's devoid of your soul, if it's devoid of your heart, it becomes very mechanical. It becomes very materialistic. It becomes very cold and calculating. And all of a sudden, here I am. I'm connecting to my heart in the theater and learning about what it means to be human again, and learning what it's like to be in somebody else's shoes, and thinking about, oh my gosh, what is it like to live if you're poor and you don't have any money and you have to take care of your family, and playing in plays and getting expanded. My mind expanded. And so I was connecting to that. And then 9.5 years ago, 10 years ago, the big event that crippled me was my ex-fiancée. She left me suddenly and unexpectedly. I didn't anticipate it. And she had waited for me to go to work. We had some problems. Like I said, there was that dysfunctional behavioral patterns that I had learned from watching my family. And so she ended up leaving me unexpectedly, and I opened the door to our apartment and found all of her stuff gone. And it just crushed me. And I remember when I walked through the door, I was like, no, 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 this cannot be happening. This cannot be happening. And it was like the air got sucked out of the room. Where she lived inside of me got ripped out of me. And it was like a scab that had been pulled off my heart. And all this pain and all this grief and all this rage spewed forth. Um, I was a madman. And then after that period, that emotional volatility passed, I would stare at the walls for hours and hours on end and break down into these uncontrollable sobs. I would stare at the wall for hours and hours on end. People would wave their hand in front of my face and nobody was home. Every time I went home, I kept reliving the experience over and over and over and over again in its intensity. And so it was exposure therapy, which would never have worked for me, that on an intense scale, that almost, at the deepest, darkest moments, I wanted to end my life. And it was at that point that I knew I was in trouble. And I got on my hands and knees and knew that I needed to start connecting to something larger than myself to get through this. And I had a long hill to climb. I was at the lowest level of hell, if in my personal hell. And so that was probably what started it. But I guess the start of it was even earlier, and then climbing out and pulling all those pieces together. And then I found Gaia, and Gaia was talking about all these understandings and consciousness and science of spirituality, and people trying to get into those deeper meanings and understandings of life. And I said, I need to learn from others. I need to figure this out. I need to kind of connect to a community of people who want to create a better world. That I just couldn't sit back anymore and allow the world to crush me in this way. That I needed to take what I've learned and what I've seen and what I experienced and turn it into something good. And Gaia really just showed up at that time when I was looking and needing the help. And boy, oh boy, has it been a a blessing in so many ways.
Gosh, Charlie, that's such a story you just shared, such an evolution through heartbreak and difficulty. And it just brings me to tears because I think that for us to really experience the awakened heart, it takes it being broken, sometimes
Hmm.
multiple times, for us to really figure out, who am I and what is this all about? What is going on here? And certainly Gaia is a fantastic place, not only to study but to meet with
Hmm.
others who are on the journey and saying, yep, I'm with you, brother. This is not an easy journey, but I'm here and we're dedicated to being our greatest selves. So thank you for sharing all that. And I've really looked at this, the awakened heart. I mean, I thought about this a lot with starting this podcast, the awakened heart. And I know in my own life, my heart broke as a child multiple times, and it was just seemed that the more it broke, the more I was able to find my own true heart that was solid within all of that, or was a light that could not be put out no matter what happened around me, with drugs and my mother and
Hmm.
heroin addiction, you name it, it was going on, and father leaving and all that. So I
Yeah.
really relate a lot to your story, and former lovers, and having your heart broken there,
Yeah.
multiple times, multiple times.
Multiple times. And for
Oh,
me, when it was happening multiple times, and it was like it was the same pattern that I was falling into. And I kept thinking to myself, well, if this is like the third time that this has happened, something must be inside of me that I need to heal, that I need to get under control, that I need to recognize, because I'm drawing this into me because of something that I haven't either addressed within me, or my wounds are attracting her wounds and vice versa. And we're looking to each other in order for us to feel better, but we're not doing it. We're just wounding ourselves because we haven't taken the time to finally really get in deep there and really investigate what is it that I need to heal within myself, so that I'm no longer drawing the people to me, and vice versa, that is not establishing a healthy, dynamic, amazing relationship.
yeah, we
What
see
is
it
it
a
that
lot.
I'm attracting? Right.
We see it a lot, right, with codependencies, right, and just this kind of lock, and it's like this lock-in that's so
Yeah.
dysfunctional. But then sometimes we see the beauty of a relationship that's really enjoy,
Oh,
both
yeah.
people autonomous and strong, but connecting and co-creating, but not codependent. you know
Yes.
so this is a huge area. I had no idea we were going to go here, but that's the beauty of conversation. You know, and I know, Charlie, you have done so much in your life, and you have some really deep stories. Would you share, you know, one or two other stories? You already shared a huge one there, that have it really felt like it just oriented you to being a bigger you, to really awakening to the greatness of your own heart.
Absolutely. And I think I want to share with your audience and your listeners that a lot of the stories that I have to share and how I awakened was through seeing other people's pain, through witnessing and waking up to my own selfish, narcissistic, self-absorbed mindset. There was a period of my life, especially right after I got wounded when I was in the service. It was a moral injury. That was called a moral injury, where you're basically your heart knows what's right, but your mind tells you to do what your heart knows is wrong. And that's moral. That's when you violate your conscience. That's when you violate that code that we're all encoded with. Every human being is encoded with this idea that life is to be valued and cherished and preserved to the best of your ability, to keep the balance of life intact. And when I violated that, then I went into this very, it's just about me. It's just about, me taking care of my needs and the heck with everybody else. And so I ended up traveling the world, and I ended up seeing things, here I am, I'm trying to, be this rebel, and I was being awakened to the sufferings of the world. And there's three stories that I want to share that really cracked my heart open. And the first one was in 2001, and I was a mess at that time, and I was looking for answers, and I didn't realize how privileged we were, being born here in the United States and living in the Western world. And I ended up going down to Brazil for party. I was just hanging out with some group of people we were there to go out on the beach and to celebrate the New Year. But one of the things that we did is we brought gifts to some of the kids that were living in the barrios. And I remember going and driving through and seeing this disparity of the very rich and the very poor. And it was the first time that I'd really, really, really seen that, because I didn't see it here it was blind to it. And I was thinking, oh my gosh. And I would see where we were going and where we were driving to, in the city in Rio de Janeiro, and how beautiful it was. And then just right up above the hilltop, I'd see these people living in these slums, these horrible barrios that were crunched together like animals. And that when we went to go drop off the presents, we put them that we couldn't even go in there, as a white male, and other we could not go in there because it was deadly. And I thought, wow. And it broke my heart. I thought, my gosh, how can we treat other human beings like this? How is this right? This is not right. And it made me sick to my stomach. And then to realize that, and as we would talk to people, and I would start hearing people that had come from the country up in the Brazilian jungles and area, and what they would make, and I was just at the time, $7 a month, working in the fields 12 to 18 hours a day. And I was like, are you kidding me? And it just made me realize that so many of the people in this world don't have basic necessities, don't have basic health needs, don't have basic needs. They can't take care of them. They have to do things that goes against their nature in order to survive. And it broke my heart. And I started to wake up. I wasn't completely there yet, but I started to wake up to different things. So that's the first story.
Yeah, very powerful. Very powerful.
The second story was in 2005, I had the privilege of working for a group called the United States International Mission. And it was a humanitarian organization that was dedicated, its purpose and mission was to help relieve and to bring attention to and eradicate the child sex slave trade going on in Southeast Asia. And I had the opportunity to work for them for a year. It was one of the most soul satisfying jobs I'd ever had. And it awakened me to some of the problems in Southeast Asia and of the human trafficking that was going on. And I traveled to Thailand, and we were trying to rescue some of the girls, and we would bring them, take the girls that we would rescue, because most of them were kids or girls. And that's a, I don't want to go there, but the fact that we were there to try, and we would take the girls and we would bring them over to the islands in Saipan to help give them some education and training skill set so that they wouldn't fall back into those old patterns, because that's all they knew how to do. And anyway, I ended up going to also to help try to build an orphanage for the Hmong children in northern Thailand. And at the time, their communities, the Hmong, they live in the upper highlands. They have these really small villages, that they're all spread out along the upper highlands areas. And they live very, very primitively. And their male population had been decimated by the drug trafficking ring that was going on between Burma, Thailand, and not Cambodia, but one of the other countries that's right there. And it was decimating them. And so they had a lot of orphan children that were running around in these villages, and they were trying to help build up an orphanage in Chiang Mai for the kids so that they could go to school. And I was traveling, we're doing a report, taking pictures, learning about the people. And I was introduced to people living in tin sheds and corrugated tin roofs, and people having mud floors. That's where you walked in. It was mud floors and pots that they had to cook over something else, and bags that they would hang in their houses to keep the rodents and animals from getting to it, and the whole family sleeping on a bed together, grandma, grandpa, mom, dad, kids, and they're, I mean, it was just like, really? I couldn't believe it. And then as I'm taking these pictures, I'm meeting this child in one of these villages, and he was malnourished. He was 12 years old, sweet kid, came from, had two other siblings, and they were all in the middle of the hut, and they were eating, and all three of them were eating right from a bowl. And so they asked, why don't go maybe take a picture with the boy so we can, have evidence and show you where their money's going to go to that. And as I went to go sit down with this little boy who's eating, and I'm going to take a picture, this little boy looks at me, dips his spoon into his bowl, and feeds me, lifts his little and feeds me what little he had. I'm getting goosebumps as I'm telling you
So
this.
am I. So am I.
And I thought, my God, this little boy who has absolutely nothing is feeding a man who comes from everything. And that was one of the biggest awakenings I had, because I saw such abject poverty and circumstances that I'd never seen, and yet the spirit of the human goodness and love and generosity and selflessness and altruism embodied in this little boy who was malnourished, who was small, who suffered. And it was one of the things I'll never forget.
Oh, It's an incredible story. I feel like ultimately the heart is one big heart. We are so connected
Hmm.
there. And he had maintained that connection no matter what. And he didn't know another life like you did. He couldn't have that comparison. He just knew the right thing is to give, to share, to share the joy. And I think that's true. I remember, when my kids were little, they were so sweet. Like I can remember my son picking wild raspberries, and then he'd give me the best ones, like the biggest, roundest. He didn't keep them for himself. And I just loved that about him,
Hmm.
that he was so generous of spirit. And so you really saw that, and that's quite an awakening. I mean, it makes us feel like, wow, we have nothing to complain about, really, in a
Oh
sense.
yeah, well, and it's also what you hint at with just with your son and being the giving the raspberries and just generosity and get that it was innate to us. It here as we had a cultural barrier, we had a language barrier, we had a generational barrier, we had all these things that could keep us from being connected. Me and this little boy in this community. And yet, in spite of all of those things that would be there to keep us as separated from one another, there wasn't. The generosity and of the human spirit was so strong and so alive and so unadulterated in these children that I met. The beauty, I was like, there's what separates us is minimal to what's inside this heart, and it was innate. You had to learn to be mean. You have to learn to be, separating and this person is this way. Yet you take away those barriers, we celebrate each other's life. We lift each other up. I mean, here this boy did it innately.
Yeah.
That it's in our spirit to
Yes.
give to life, and he did it. I mean, and it was one of the biggest lessons I've ever learned. It was enormous.
It cracked
Enormous,
you,
enormous.
just cracked you open, didn't it? I mean, we can.
Oh my gosh, it cracked me open, and then it wrecked me, held me to when I came back. You start to look at the world around you, and you think about, my gosh, how lucky and how fortunate we are, and what keeps us from having that kind of sense of um, interconnectedness. How does that? How do we, does this? How can we break down some of the barriers that have been erected over eons of time, generations of time? How can we break these down? How can we start to help these people who are in need of help? How can we make this a more equitable and fair world for everybody?
I think
How can we get, you
it's
know?
coming back to like a deeper level of truth. I've just been studying Nassim Haramein and quantum
Hmm.
revolution when he's a physicist, and he's really talking about, things we hear vaguely, about the entanglement theory and all
Hmm.
how the universe really works, and then applying it to us,
Hmm.
and this is really where the awakening is to truth. This is actually how it works. We are all so interconnected, right? And something happens to you, and then your best friend who's living across the world knows it immediately. And whether it's good, bad,
Hmm.
or, they feel it and they call you up and say, hey, buddy, you okay? And it's like it's so inspiring, because you're
Hmm.
right. I think we learn how to close the heart. We learn how, and Ram Dass, the guy's been doing a great job with the teachings of Ram Dass, very short little 8-minute sort of videos. He's talking about this too. When we close the heart, it is so painful. It
Hmm.
is so painful, because it's like causing death to the self,
Yeah.
you know and then he's like, so keep your heart open as much as one can. And that's kind of my little mantra, is keep my heart open no matter what, is
Hmm.
kind of my own little mantra. And also follow your heart, because it knows the way.
Yeah.
Because I really do feel the heart is our most intuitive Geiger counter. It
Hmm.
knows the way, it knows whom to go to, what career to move toward, what needs to happen next, what the next unfoldment is, what spirit is asking of us.
Hmm.
If we surrender the ego, surrender the agenda we have and say, let me serve, show me how.
Yeah. Yeah, just show me how to be able to do this. Show me how I can best serve in the in the greatest capacity to live out the life that I was gifted and that can allow the greatest good to happen through me. How does that happen? How can I do that? And I often think we have to have our hearts broken in order for broken wide open in order for more love to come in. My heart had to be broken in those times that I've shared, in order for me to be available and to have my heart to grow wider so I can see the world through my heart's eyes rather than through the eyes that are coming out of my skull here. That I could feel, and it gave me a greater sensitivity and a greater understanding. And yeah, it was painful to get through that. That was part of the wounded healer is you've got to be wounded if you're going to be if you're a healer, and I tend to work with people and help people to overcome a lot of their traumas and PTSD and sleep disturbance and family dysfunctions and relational dysfunctions and so forth. You're going to have to it was because of the painful journey that I you have to go through it in order to get out of it. I mean, you just do. And when my heart was broken in these moments, it just gave me so much more compassion when I finally got to the other side. So much more gratitude, so much more appreciation, so much more value for life itself. There's another story that I'd love to include and share, and it was recently I went to Lebanon to help with some of the refugees that were going out there. This was in 2017, and we were trying to help bring some medical supplies and food to some of the families that were coming out of the wars in Iraq and Syria, and they were fleeing from ISIS at the time, and these poor people, my goodness, they lived in such, again, squalor conditions. Walking around the town of Beirut, and you'd see the crossover of the Muslims and Christians together that remarkably were living together well, and didn't see any kind of problem there. But this huge disparity again between the well-to-do and the poor. And these woman, my gosh, she was a saint. She was had to flee. I think she had to flee Iraq at the time, and with two grown crippled sons and a daughter they had to flee when they were coming in because they were going to cause harm to the family. And here she was living in this little squalid apartment, just asking for just a little bit of help. But she bore that burden with such grace, with such like equanimity.
Mm. Wow.
No anger, no no rage, just wanting just a little bit of help. And she just said, this is what God gave me. And I'm okay. I just need a little bit of help. And I just couldn't. And she had such a serenity about her and smiled. And her sons were crippled and deformed. They were older. And I thought, wow, where does that strength come from?
Hmm.
Where does that? That's a strength that's much greater than us. That fills somebody with such, I mean, effusive peace that just permeated the entire room. Where does that come from? And how can we bring more of that here in our world so that we can feel it and know it and sense it in ourselves?
Goodness. It's incredible to think so because, here we are having gone through last year, 2020, COVID and all that, and everything's upside down. And I think a lot of people are trying to find what you've just described in this
Mhm.
woman, that she was so centered in her own beingness and her connection to her God, the divine, the creator, the source,
Right.
whatever we would choose to call it. She was so connected that
Right.
nothing could really destabilize her too much. And yet she was honest. I need a little help. We need a little help. It wasn't that she
Yep.
was, glossing over it. She knew she needed support and help, but she was able to know, like, that she wasn't fighting the what is. We know, like, when we're in resistance to whatever's going on, it's not going to bode well. We could read a bazillion teachers from, the ancient texts, and it will say, like, come into agreement with what is, be at peace in your heart, and have
Yeah.
joy in your heart. And yet we see right now so many people saying, I was on a Facebook Live yesterday being interviewed, and I said, everybody's saying it's so hard, it's so difficult, it's so awful. And I said, is it really? Is it
Mm.
really that hard? I mean, yeah. Some
Mhm.
things, it's not much fun. I don't get to go have dinner with my friend Charlie here,
That's right.
and things are disrupted, and we're
Yeah.
working from home, and there's disruption for sure. But what are the gifts? I mean, the gifts are immense, to go within, to go deeper, to find this place of equanimity.
Yes. And it is so, once you're able to find it, and I'm not saying that I have, I think I've touched it, I've tasted it, I've sensed it, I've smelled it, I witnessed it, I was in awe of it, in the presence of this incredible woman. I mean, it was like a saintly woman, and yet in that part of the world, it was God, Christianity, Muslim, but this is the divine, whatever the divine, the creator, the light, conscious, whatever that is. There's something, and when somebody has it and they know it, and it's a mystical truth. It's a mystical experience of the life force that moves through all of us. It's something that we surrender to, and the more we're able to learn how to surrender to it, to not resist, like you were talking about, to not give in to that, to not let what's happening outside of us, to have more control over us than what we have inside of us, that can calm us, that can put things in perspective, that can bring us into a place of that equanimity, that incredible strength, and meaningful, but when I came away from there was this sense of like, oh my gosh, it's there. It does exist. This wasn't from the pulpit. This wasn't from the altar. This wasn't from um, whatever place that you hear people, preaching and talking. This was a humbled woman who lived in her circumstances with the utmost grace and dignity, and it was inspiring. And it's available to all of us. It truly is. And if it exists in one person, it can exist in all of us. And I guess that's part of the spiritual journey, and that's part of the awakened heart.
I think it's beautiful. Like, she's such a teacher, right? We look to
Hmm.
teachers in all kinds of places, but there's the most perfect teacher in her. So it's amazing. These three stories are so powerful. Plus the very first one that you mentioned, which was huge in and of itself. Um, so I'm going to ask now, how has these experiences really changed how you show up in the world?
Well, I think it's getting, probably the biggest thing is it humbled me. I think that was some of the biggest lessons that I needed to learn on this part of my journey, was the humble lot. And to really get a grasp on you and your relationship to life, and how other people live. And we can get so caught up in our own, narratives and stories and issues, and not to diminish them, I'm not diminishing, but it's just to give perspective and a wider lens, a wider opening to how other people live. For me, how other people live, and seeing them, the way what they have to do, and the choices they have to make, and the options that they have. was really, really critical in how I show up, so that I'm much more open-minded. I'm much less critical. I'm aware of how fortunate we are to have the options that we do here and the choices that we do, and to not be so quick to judge where other people are coming from. To figure out um, how can we all coexist in this world, because a lot of times we can fall into the traps of entitlement and judgment and all these different things. And when your heart breaks open from the story, like the stories that I've shared today, you're not able to see those world with that lens anymore. And so it allows me to try, when I teach, to give to help people to tap into that same kind of understanding, to let them see things through other people's eyes, to help them to walk into other people's shoes, to be able to find ways for us to all live together, and to make it possible that everybody can live well. You can still have wealthy people, you can still have, but just let everybody live well too. And I think that it's also, I find myself wanting to teach more, and to give people help them to tap into that mystical knowledge within them, help them to learn that your traumas and those stories that have wounded you are doorways to a greater understanding. If you'll walk the journey, if you'll go down that path, you don't have to stay stuck, in the betrayals, in the abandonments, in the dysfunctions, in the losses and grief and sorrows. There's ways to get through that to the other side. And when you do, it's like all of a sudden the life that's been, waiting for you is there. And I want to help to lead people to that, you know.
Yes, 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 like a Pied Piper leading the children. It's like leading us back to ourselves, leading us,
Hmm.
and that through the trauma, that nothing is for naught. Like it all has a purpose. Everything that happens to us really does have a purpose, that it's going to lead us. But it is very sad when we see that somebody's just closed down and they just refuse to open up that heart again, because that is the doorway to everything. I think, I mean, the mind is fantastic. I'm so grateful to have a good, strong, healthy mind and a strong, healthy body. But the heart is very sensitive too. The heart is
Yeah.
very sensitive. It's
Hmm.
like opening and closing and opening, all the time, according to what's happening. But if we can find that beautiful place of peace, through the wounding, I think it's really powerful what you're saying. So, given that viewpoint and what you've learned, and I also have learned a lot about from humility. Had two huge businesses that both crashed miserably in different ways, and it was just like, wow, what do I have to learn? Humility, humility.
Hmm.
It's
Hmm.
great to have a vision, it's great to implement it, but it doesn't always work the way you think it's going to. And life happens,
Yeah.
and these things happen for a reason. And I always really feel that, like, okay, there's a reason this is going on like this. This is a reason this is shaking out this way. So, given
Hmm.
that, I want to ask, what is your heart vision for the future of our world right now? Because we are in a lot of strife, we are in a lot
Hmm.
of difficulty, we are going through a crucible. What do you see? What do you feel?
Well, I think we're at a crossroads, and we have two different directions that we can go. We can go where we are a much more interconnected, much more balanced, much more harmonious world, where we are seeing through the eyes of our heart, through our awakened heart. Or we can take the crises that are happening, the socioeconomic crises, the racial crises, the pandemic itself, all of these things, and we can resort back, because it creates fear. We can resort back to old patterns, an old way of thinking, and I think you're seeing that happening. on a cosmic level, on a personal level, in a family level. People are warring with each other. They're having battles with each other, and they don't understand that light and dark are part of the way the universe is organized. That's just the way it works down here in this dimension, in this era. That's the way we work. That's the way it is. And so once you can accept that, you can move through that and recognizing that the light and the dark have to work under the same rules. All right. And they're going to be battling right now, and it's going to be coming from all ends. And that's why getting really close and really centered in yourself is so absolutely critical right now. Healing that war within yourself, connecting to that light, connecting to that awakening, opening your heart, trusting in yourself, in your judgment, in your intuition, connecting to that voice that's within you. Because if everybody can start to do that and start owning your own shadow, pulling your own shadow back, understanding that, recognizing that if I'm pulling that, I'm adding more light to the world. I'm adding more love to the world. I'm adding more, and standing up for those things is going to be absolutely critical. If we all do our part with that, or at least a good number of us do that, I think we can hit a tipping point where we go over into a whole new paradigm where there is a lot more consciousness in how we do our economics. There is a lot more consciousness in how we engage in racial, and we're to the point where there's no more racial issues anymore. We have transcended that. We look at each other as people of character and goodness and see with the eyes of our heart and our soul in the person. I think we can transcend a lot of the issues that we are facing as a culture, but we have to do our part. And we can't get sucked up into all of the crises that are seeking our attention. It is the nature of that, is to draw our attention away from ourselves, to get us caught up in the external circumstances, and recognizing, if once we can recognize that it's not about that, it's about me taking care of this right here and getting as aligned as I can, getting in balance, getting clear, getting that clarity, being a seeker of truth, part of the spiritual path. And I think this gets lost sometimes, is that it's the path of truth. You're seeking truth, right? And the closer you get to truth, you're going to have more and more resistances as you get close. Just the way it works. But you got to stay committed to that. And it's a path of self-knowledge as well. And so the more we can engage with that, and we can learn new truths, being flexible and willing to say, wow, I didn't, I had believed this before, but now I understand this is the, and so you keep walking that journey. And we all got to do that. And the more of us who can stay on that together, I think we may not see it, but our future generations will see it. We're on this transformational period, enormous. I think it's a privilege to be alive now. Really, even though we're going through all these things, it's truly a privilege, and we're going to be on the cusp of a whole new world, a healthier, better world, if we do our part.
It's so beautifully said, and I agree with you 100%. I think we're at a very powerful place. I feel very blessed to be alive at this time, and I think we came at this time to usher in a more of a, should we say, a golden age. And it's written in every text, the Garden of Eden, to come back home, and it always starts with the individual. Always, like, as we shift within, as Gandhi said, be the change you want to see in the world. As we shift within, so it ripples out. As within, so without. As above, so below. These axioms are very true, and you speak so much wisdom here. I'm thinking, like, is there like one specific thing you do, or is there a nugget of wisdom that you could bring our listeners today that would really help them on a daily level, perhaps, to kind of navigate? Is this really about navigation, isn't it? It's like a navigating your journey
Yeah.
truth and goodness. And how would you say would be the most helpful thing, the golden nugget of everything you've learned? Because you've learned so much and you've spoken so much wisdom, that people can go, oh, I could do that one thing, or those few things.
Well, I think one of the most important things is to have a spiritual practice. Whether that's meditating in the morning, whether that's saying prayers, whether that's chanting, whether that's yoga, or a combination of different things. But I think it's so critical for you to have your own spiritual practice where you connect to the divine, where you connect to God, where you connect to the creator, whatever, however you define that which is greater and that is the author of all of us. However you connect, do that. Make a commitment every morning, even if it's 5 minutes in the morning. You're setting yourself to remain connected to your higher self in your lower self here, and to be able to move more fluidly through that. Make a commitment to speak the truth as best you possibly can, and with the understanding that I have limitations. My knowledge, it needs to grow. Being open-minded to new truths that will come in, but make a commitment to speak the truth at all times. That will help you to align with integrity, your integrity, to be into that nitty-gritty of yourself, and being able to recognize that that's where it has to begin, and don't take anything for granted. Don't take anything for granted. Your life is precious. Your life is so precious. It's a precious privilege to be alive, to wake up every morning, to breathe, to think, to enjoy, to love. It's a precious privilege. I'm waking up with that. And sometimes you're going to have bad days. Sometimes you're going to wake up and you're like, that's okay. Yeah, I'm alive. But today really, yeah, it's okay too. That's part of, what Rumi talks about. Invite those guests into your guest house. They're going to sweep away something. So see your life. Listen to the voice of your conscience. That's the voice of the divine in you. Connect to it. Let it grow stronger. The more you listen to it, be yourself. I think this is one of the most important, is to be yourself. There is nobody else that can be you. And very oftentimes when you're an empath, or you're very sensitive to the world, you want to be everything for everybody else sometimes, and no, you need to be you, because nobody else can be you. Don't let anybody take away the beauty and goodness and uniqueness of yourself, who you are. Learn to forgive. It's a tough thing sometimes, but it will soften you and open up your heart, and love. Love with all your heart. Love passionately. Love selflessly. Love deeply. Love enduringly. Sometimes love can be painful, but you must endure, and you won't regret it. You won't regret it. Stay humble. Stay strong, and live courageously as well. Because every breath you take is a gift. And if you can remember that.
Wow, Charlie, I've got goosebumps all through my body from what you just said. It's so beautiful. I'm so grateful to be with you today. I love you so much. You're just one of my favorite friends. And thank you. Thank you for all of what you've shared. And it's so moving. And bless you on your journey. I know you're doing great work and helping many, many people. And we just need more Charlie Pacellos in our world. But yet, what you said is true, because like Oscar Wilde said, be yourself because everyone else is taken. And
That's right.
it's true, right? So we don't really need more Charlies, because we can't have other Charlie. We have Charlie, and then we have each of us. And the impression I got as you were speaking was this sort of blossoming heart as these petals open up, and they keep opening up, and it's really an infinity game, an eternal game, never really ends, we're just constantly becoming more and more and more aware. So our awakening is happening moment to moment. It's not like we awakened once and then that's it. It doesn't work that way. It's a constant evolution, which is so beautiful. The universe becoming aware of itself, the creator becoming aware of itself as we come truer and truer to our central core, which is the awakened heart. So
Oh my gosh. And then it's, when you recognize that and live from that place, and you're able to, and to accept the world as it is, not as you would wish it to be, but as it is, then you can start to make really healthy changes, because you're not in that place of resistance anymore. You're open and available. Your arms are like this, and your heart is like this, and you're in everything you see as you walk by as a gift, and you're just celebrating life with every cell of your being, and you're like, wow, this is amazing.
it's magic. It's like the
That's
little boy
magic.
feeding you the
That's
food.
magic.
He's just celebrating life and sharing life, sharing the celebration. So I just thank you so much for being here. I know for our listeners, thank you to our listeners, and I want to encourage you, the listeners, to join our Gaia community. I'll put a link below in the description, and please share this out with other people as you see fit. And Charlie, it's my absolute honor to be with you today. Thank you.
Oh, thank you for honoring me today, Julia. This has been great. This was fantastic.
Love you lots. And
You're amazing. So many people need to know, and there needs to be more Julia. There's only one, though. There's only one like you.
All right. Many blessings to everyone. Bye. Bye.
Blessing.